On a night in 1861, while the air was thick with a smell of pine and smoke, enslaved men and women rose in fury. Torches lit the sky. Flames devoured the plantation, and masters once untouchable were trapped inside their own burning homes. Screams echoed across the fields, silenced only by the roar of fire. It was a night of vengeance, a night of fire, and one that history tried desperately to erase. His name was Josiah? Born into bondage in the red clay soil of Georgia, Josiah had lived 35 years in chains. The plantation was vast, a kingdom of cotton and cruelty, owned by a man named Edward Calhoun. Calhoun styled himself as a gentleman planter with wealth, elegance, and a reputation that stretched across counties. But beneath the polished surface of his estate lay violence, degradation, and endless suffering. The Calhoun plantation was run with an iron hand. Overseers on horseback patrolled the fields with whips and rifles. Every morning before dawn, bells rang out, summoning hundreds of enslaved men, women, and children into the fields. The cotton cut their fingers raw, their backs bent under the merciless sun, while overseers' whips lashed those who faltered. For Josiah, the lash had become a cruel companion. Scars mapped his back, each one a memory of disobedience or defiance. He had seen his wife dragged into the master's house and returned with tears she would never explain. He had seen children sold away, their cries echoing as wagons carried them off. And in the cabin's little, more than rotting wood and dirt floors, he had watched neighbors sicken and die from starvation and disease. But in 1861, the world beyond the plantation trembled. The nation fractured into civil war. Talk of freedom was no longer just a whisper, it was a rumor carried on the wind. Union soldiers advanced in distant states, and the enslaved knew that every battle was a battle for them, too. Josiah listened carefully when news arrived. He knew the South was weak with fear. And in that weakness, he saw opportunity. The fire in Josiah's soul had been burning for years. But what turned it into a plan of destruction was a single moment. One evening, after a long day in the fields, a boy named Samuel collapsed from exhaustion. Barely 12 years old, Samuel was whipped for slowing the harvest. The boy did not rise again. His small body was buried in a shallow grave near the cabins. That night, Josiah knelt by the grave. His fists clenched, his heart hardened. He swore he would never again allow the masters to rest easy. He would strike back not just for Samuel, but for every soul chained in Calhoun's empire. Whispers began to spread in the quarters. At first, only a few trusted voices. Then more. Meetings disguised as prayer circles, where words of scripture masked the language of revolt. Plans were laid in the shadows. Torches would be their weapons. Fire their ally. The enslaved studied the plantation carefully. They knew when the overseers drank heavily, when Calhoun and his family slept, when the winds blew. They mapped the barns, the quarters, the main house. Fire could spread quickly through the wooden structures. Once it started, there would be no stopping it. The night was chosen. Late summer of 1861. A night heavy with heat, when the air itself seemed ready to ignite. The enslaved gathered quietly after dusk, torches hidden in bundles of straw. Josiah stood at their center, his voice steady, though his heart pounded. He reminded them of Samuel, of mothers sold, of backs whipped raw, of chains that had held them their whole lives. He promised that by morning Calhoun's empire would be ash. At midnight, the revolt began. The first torch was thrown into the stables. The dry hay caught instantly, flames rising in a furious roar. Horses screamed, hooves pounding as the fire spread. Overseers rushed out, confused, shouting orders. Before they could react, another blaze ignited the barn, then the cotton storehouse. Fire leapt from building to building, fueled by the summer wind. Then came the big house. Josiah and others advanced, torches in hand. Windows shattered as flames poured inside. Curtains ignited, furniture crackled, and soon the proud columns glowed red with heat. Inside, Calhoun and his family awoke to chaos. Smoke filled the hallways. Servants screamed. Flames blocked the exits. The plantation that had been his pride, his kingdom, became his prison. Josiah watched from the yard as the roof of the big house collapsed. He could hear the screams inside, pleas for mercy, for water, for salvation. None came. The same man who had denied mercy to Samuel, who had denied humanity to Josiah, now met his end in fire. The night was a symphony of terror. Overseers tried to rally, rifles cracking in the dark, but they were overwhelmed. Some fell to the flames. Others were struck down by enslaved men who had traded plow handles for clubs, sickles for blades. By dawn, the plantation was unrecognizable. Ash coated the ground like snow. The stables, barns, quarters, and big house were reduced to smoking skeletons. Calhoun and several of his family were dead. Overseers lay scattered in the fields. For a brief, fleeting moment, the enslaved tasted freedom. The master was gone. The plantation was no more. But freedom born of fire is fragile. By midday, word spread to nearby plantations. White militias rode fast, rifles ready, blood in their eyes. They found Josiah and the others hiding in the woods. Dogs tracked them. Guns fired. The captives were dragged back, their wrists bound, their fate already decided. The punishment was brutal. Some were executed on the spot. Others were hanged publicly in town squares, their bodies left as warnings. A few, including women accused of starting the fires, were burned alive, their screams turned into spectacles of fear. Josiah, the leader, was given the cruelest fate. He was chained, whipped until flesh peeled, and finally hanged at the gates of what remained of the Calhoun estate. The revolt shook Georgia and beyond. Newspapers called it savagery, barbarity. Politicians warned that the enslaved could not be trusted, that stricter control was needed. Laws were tightened, patrols increased. The South doubled down on slavery even as the Civil War raged on. But among the enslaved, Josiah's name lived on, passed in whispers, in songs sung in the dark, in stories told to children. He was remembered not as a murderer, but as a man who refused to bow, who turned the tools of bondage into weapons of liberation. History, written by those who feared his story, erased him from textbooks. His revolt was buried under silence, his name nearly forgotten. But if we listen closely, in the ashes of the past, we can still hear his voice. This was Josiah's story. The story of a man who burned his master's world to the ground, and in doing so, carved his name into the secret history of resistance. This was Josiah's story, but many remain untold. If you want to uncover more hidden slave revolts and forgotten histories, click on the playlist here. And if you believe voices like Josiah's deserve to be remembered, subscribe to this channel, and join us as we continue to bring the shadows of history into the light.